All right, let's take a look at the next part of this design process. Okay, so we've been through the first round and kind of, we whittled down a few ideas, and now you're kind of trying to figure out what to do next. So, say you've got a situation where you've got a name, Lindsay Mendel, a lot of letters, right? And we look at it, and this name just really isn't helping us here, right? There's no repetition. Sometimes we can see a word like, I don't know, like, well, let's just do this really fast. Like sometimes you might have a really cool name like Adam, right? Now, in this particular font, Adam doesn't look that good, right? And this is an important thing to keep in mind. The letters that you have don't always look great in any given alphabet. So you have to go find a font, a typeface that is a little more amenable to your letter forms. So we look at that and we know that there are other fonts where the A is round instead of having the more complex shape. So we can look at something like this and we could say, well, let's see. Oh, I just bumped it off. Century Gothic is one of my favorites to start with. It's a nice graphic, architectural, font, and it provides a lot of what we see now in terms of a repetition or rhythm, at least. The A, the D, the A all share a common shape. The M is rounded, so there's a lot of similarity going on here. Whereas in here, not so much, right? So even if we went in and we did something like Century Gothic and say, well, is there anything there? Even here, not so much. So then maybe we go and we do something where we take the name and then there we go. And then you scoot it over, and say, let's just use the word creative, just, Lindsay Creative, as if it's an organization or a club or something, not a club, but, a creative group, essentially, right? So we could do something like this, and then, maybe we take it since we got the bold. Okay, so even here, we're like, okay, this is kind of struggling even still, right? Even with a neat font. So you might be stuck in a situation where you pretty much, we could, okay, let's just take a look at the last name Mendel for a moment, and let's add that font to it and see if that helps at all. Well, a little bit, right? Maybe Mendel Creative might be a better option. I don't know. You try it. You know, but it's not singing, right? It's clearly it's struggling a bit. So, you know, so maybe Lindsay would like to use her first name. Maybe she doesn't like her last name. She would rather use her first name. And this is a situation where you might end up having to go look for a font, something that says something about you as a designer. So, maybe she would go in here and maybe she might go for, you know, maybe a script, you know. And she goes, well, I don't know about that, Sometimes this is a weird font, by the way, you know. And you go, well, maybe that's not right. Maybe it's not going to work in that font, right? So maybe you need to go find something else. Maybe something a little more playful. Like oh, that's kind of cute, right? It's got a little bit of a whimsical sort of look to it. I don't know, how Lindsay feels about herself as a designer, but something like that might work, right? And then you might take, this and contrast it, right? You can call this creative, right? And then maybe this gets smaller, right? And then we start playing around. It does have a light. It does not. What is it? I don't know what I'm doing here. Let's try italic. Hello, there it goes. Well, maybe not, right? maybe we'll just stick with regular, and then maybe we'll just make it smaller, right? And you kind of play around with these kinds of things. Maybe we use extreme letter spacing or something, maybe it gets to be a little bit bigger. I don't know, maybe 36 or something like that, and maybe the tracking might be 300, and so you play with something like that, or maybe it's all cap, right? You have to try all these different things, and see what happens. And so maybe that's now a little too large. Maybe it needs to be a shade smaller, or maybe smaller yet, Okay? So you've got to just sort of explore that, Now in a situation like this, where this name has given us something, then suddenly a lot of things can happen as you start to think about, the contrast in scale, or contrast in weight, or style, or something like that. So maybe, maybe we tighten up the tracking on something like this, maybe even more, maybe, and maybe tighten up the tracking on that, and suddenly you've got something going here, right? Or it might be this one, maybe that one's the bold one, and this is the not bold one, right? Okay. So you start playing around with those kinds of relationships, and seeing what happens, Then there's also opportunities for, let's say your name was something like Jamie Sites. Okay, let's try something completely different, and Sites, interesting word, but again, the names with this font isn't giving us much, right? So here we might go, well, Sites, Sites, I don't know, Sites Design Group or something. Maybe we could do something with that, right? So maybe we take this out here and we type in Design Group. Kind of seeing where this goes, right? Just go, okay, Sites Design, does that work? And, going back to possibly our fallback font, let's just go back to that Arial, a Century Gothic for a moment. Again, it doesn't give us much here, right? But maybe we do something like this, and we type in creative. It's always, I just happen to like this word, obviously there's a whole list on the website of other things you can do, and suddenly there's some possibilities here, right? It's like, okay, that's starting to work. So maybe we try some really tight tracking. Tracking is always a fun thing to kind of play with, because it creates interesting relationships, and it also eliminates the spaces and makes things look more like it's a unit as opposed to individual letter forms. And so now we have like 3 dots. Well, there's something there. Dots are a fun thing. If you got a dot in your name, sometimes it's a neat thing to kind of take advantage of that and use a, make a dot, and maybe make it red. Red's always a good color, right? And then, something like that, right? So, or maybe it's on creative, I don't know. Maybe it doesn't work so good there, right? Maybe we need to send it to the back. Range, send to back, playing around with that kind of stuff. Maybe that dot right there turns white, inside of that. Who knows? So it's the idea here is to be looking for opportunities that, what was I going to do with that one? I don't remember now. I set this up for some reason. Oh yeah, I remember now. So here, anyway, we're getting to the point where we're kind of getting somewhere, right? So the whole trick here is to explore the fonts to see if you can find a font that fits with the name, And I guess this goes back to Project 6, where we were playing around with just different fonts that do different things, right? So here, we might, be looking for something else. So as, could kind of play around with looking for maybe a different kind of script, like maybe, come on, there we go. Like that maybe, or, maybe not, maybe we find something that's a little bit more illustrative, something, let's see, this is not, my little thing is sticking here. Okay, let's try something else. Anyway, as you know from Project 6, this can go on forever, right? So, and then sometimes you see this and you go, wow, that might be an opportunity for an initial cap. Sometimes initial caps are fun to work with, right? Okay, so again, it's about exploring, looking around for different fonts that fit your name or that create a sense of rhythm or style, and just exploring. Now, say you've got a name like Ken Flores. Okay, Ken Flores, this poor guy, this isn't happening either, right? It's just Flores is a name that, is very common. So having that name stick out in a crowd is going to be difficult, Ken is a name that is kind of, it's like Bob, it's just sort of it's a name that doesn't have a lot of character. So maybe you've got one of those kind of names. And so what can you do there? Well, sometimes you can look at the initials for each of the names, and sometimes you can do some interesting things with that. So maybe the KF is something, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and then maybe we find like a really super, super bold font, something like extra bold or black, and Myriad, I think it's Myriad. It's either Myriad. Is it Myriad? Myriad? Where are you? Myriad. M-Y, Myriad. No, it's not. It's, what is it? Lucida? Oh, I can't remember the name of that font now. Where is that? Is it Eris? No, it's Gill Sans. Yeah, it's Gill Sans. I love Gill Sans. And you take something like this, and let's make this really big. Let's make this 150 so that it's nice and big. Hello. Thank you. Gotta love it. There we go. And we work with this. And some fun things you can do is if you have a letter form that could be swapped, you can turn it into an outline, text convert the path, and that makes it a graphic instead of a letter form. And then you can transform it by flipping it horizontal, and then sometimes the letter forms can share a stroke, right? And then that could become something fun. So that's an option as well. And the trick here is to, as we get closer to the final logo, is to get something that's tight and that's easy to remember and that's not complicated. And typically your first or your last name, but usually not both, but it could be, is the answer, or initials, could be just one initial, but there's a variety of ways of handling this as well. All right, so those are some ideas that you might think about as you start to refine your logo design before you get to the business card stage. All righty, so have some fun.